Hello and welcome to Newswire Afghanistan Special. I'm Jawad Tehami. After 2 decades of war with the foreign forces, the Taliban returned to take over Afghan capital Kabul while declaring the war was over. They announced a general amnesty for all and said they want a peaceful transition of power. The US-supported Afghan president Ashraf Ghani fled the country soon after the Taliban reached the gates of the capital. Regional countries, including China and Russia, have expressed optimism for the cooperative relationships with the Taliban. Pakistan has urged the international community to support the reconstruction of the war-torn country. What would be the future of Afghanistan amid the ongoing situation over there? To talk more about this, we are joined by Senator Anwar Kakar, who is joining us from Islamabad. Senator Kakar, thank you very much for your time. So the Taliban have announced that this is the end to the war in Afghanistan. So do we take it as an absolute defeat of the US forces?
Thank you so much. This rapid and swift advancement of forceful takeover by Taliban, I'll be quite honest with you, has come as a surprise not just for myself, but probably to the larger international community. Yes, people were expecting that the Afghan regime or the republic would crumble, but we were thinking that probably it would take at least 6 to 12 months. And after a fierce resistance, they may be in a position to have a partial control of the whole of the country. But the things have turned contrary to that. And in my opinion now, the biggest challenge is of how would a militant organization who has fought for 2 decades and lost with the US and NATO forces would administer the state apparatus. That is the biggest challenge. Probably the survival was difficult on the onslaught of a military onslaught of US and its allies, but running the statecraft and the governance issues would be a biggest challenge for this group. I mean, the whole of the global community, the regional players, everyone is very closely monitoring the behavior of Taliban vis-a-vis its populace. It would be the situation of women's rights. How would they be allowed to have access to education? What the international community was calling to retain the reasonable gains. What sort of situation would be vis-a-vis minorities, so on and so forth. So everyone is closely monitoring. It's too early to comment on that, but the situation is unfolding on the streets of Kabul and Kandahar and Iraq, so on and so forth. And we'll see how the relationship between the Emirat and its citizenry, it develops. And to be honest with you, the future of the region in Afghanistan depends on this intertwined relationship.
Okay, Senator Kakar will try to delve deeper into what exactly is going to happen in Afghanistan with the Taliban control over there, and they in fact controlling more of the territory as compared to what they controlled back in 2001 when the US forces and its allies invaded Afghanistan. Well, sticking to this particular point for the moment, that how do you see, I mean, as you have just mentioned, that nobody saw this coming so fast, but it happened within some days. And then we had that US intelligence report that predicted that the Taliban could take over Kabul as early as in 90 days. But since that report was released, it happened to be in 3 days. What made nobody saw some sort of resistance on the part of the Afghan national forces at all, and the provincial capitals, one after the other, kept on falling to the hands of the Taliban. So, I mean, over 300,000 Afghan national security forces equipped with the modern technology, and they were trained by the US and allies over the last 20 years. So what went wrong for them?
I think so. A deep culture of kleptocracy. particularly amongst the governance structure of the Afghan Republic and its so-called defense forces. A very high level of corrupt practices. There was lack of leadership. And probably the rank and file was not convinced that they should lay their lives. And the bigger question probably for them was that for whom they should lay this life. The country and the nation for which they would supposedly should come forward and have fought, that idea of patriotism was blended with the kleptocratic and corrupt Afghan leadership culture of corrupt Afghan leadership. That is one of the hindrances, and that more or less, in my opinion, has crumbled the whole structure of the Afghan security forces, and it has squandered the presence of 2 decades and trillions of dollars of American taxpayers and the rest of the European taxpayers' money, which is unfortunate. But that's what has happened. If you see in the manner the former President Ghani and his close associates with all their tirades against Pakistan, Wahibullah, and the rest of the country, Amrullah Saleh, I'm hinting towards, they had focused only on doing a wild propaganda against the state of Pakistan rather than focusing on their own internal security challenges. So the wrong priorities, the kleptocratic culture, and the corrupt Afghan leadership, it all multiplied to the outcome which we and the larger international community has witnessed yesterday at the presidential palace of Taliban fighters takeover. So they're quite a cynic and historical in its own context. Those scenes were. It was unbelievable, probably for the many to watch.
So, Senator Kakar, you have just mentioned many important elements which actually contributed to the fall of the Afghan government at the hands of the Taliban, and that so quickly. But when we saw Taliban reaching at the gates of the capital, Kabul, usually we see the person who claims to be the leader of a certain country and happens to be at the top position as the president. And whenever some sort of a crisis or a hard situation arrives knocking at the door, he keeps on standing firm in order to face that. But rather we see something very different happening from Afghan President Ashraf Ghani. As soon as the Taliban reached at the capital gates, he fled the country.
I mean, exactly. This is what I'm trying to explain, that for last 2 decades, the goalpost of Afghan Republic, initially of fighting terrorism, Al-Qaeda, the remnants or associates of Al-Qaeda, that was there probably in the first 6 months or a year of American and NATO's presence over there. But to me it appears that it morphed with the NATO and American presence over there, and they changed their goalposts to some larger political ambitions. And they started thinking about greater Afghanistan and so-called sloganeering. And their more focus was to alter geography of the region rather than control their own territory. I mean, if you see and observe in the kind of developments which has emerged from the Afghan leadership since the days of Mr. Karzai, and which were continued by the later on leadership also. So they were more focused in greater Afghanistan and the issues of Devran and so on and so forth. Rather than changing their priority and focusing and bringing their goalposts in developing their own internal security, controlling and managing their own territory, bringing good governance, focusing on the delivery to the common populace, they in the process thought that this sort of ultra-nationalism would be enough for the Afghan populace to stay loyal to them and would develop for them as a larger constituency. Unfortunately, or fortunately, that experience has terribly failed. And on the other hand, when there was no idea of that so-called Greater Afghanistan, and Taliban, who were initially a rogue militia, they proven themselves, who associated themselves with the national aspiration, with the nationalistic aspiration of their local populace. They have at least projected themselves, and they were quite successful in projecting them as the indigenous and de jure representative of people's will and nationalistic aspirations of Afghan people. And they are the one who became the symbol of resistance, and they optimized that resistance, and they survived more or less for 2 decades, despite heavy military presence, which is unparalleled in human history, the kind of might U.S. and its NATO's allies militarily has. And that became that mystery and mystical power of this rogue militia. And today, look where they are. I mean, everyone
Senator Kakar, point well taken. They are controlling even more territory as compared to the they were holding back when U.S. invaded Afghanistan back in 2001. Senator Kakar, please stay with us. I am now joined by senior correspondent Sumaira Khan, who is at the Torkham-Pak-Afghan border. Sumaira, thank you very much. I was watching your report earlier, and you are right over there. We've seen the flag by the Taliban being raised over there. It is well in place over there at the Afghan side of the border. What is the situation on the ground? First of all, share with us that experience when you first arrived over there and the Taliban had taken over that particular border.
Thank you, Jawad. Thank you for asking for the details. And yes, it was very overwhelming kind of a situation on the other side of the border. And I saw many people standing there, and they were waiting to get into the Pakistan territory. But since I'm reporting this issue, there are many things on ground right now. Officials, immigration officials, custom officials, and those who are looking after the trade volume on the border crossing right there, they were waiting for the clear directives from the government side. Obviously, our government is very much clear-headed on all the issues pertaining to that biggest trade transit point between the two countries. But yes, there are certain issues because Pakistan was first in place. They were functioning through an in-place agreement with a line between the two governments. But right now, since the government has been taken over by Taliban on the other side of the border, so yet there are many things to be clear on for the record correction. So when I spoke to custom officials over there, they wanted to stay anonymous. They shared this information that yes, we are waiting for the government's directive, and the first directive we received was to keep the trade volume going right now, because there could be supply issues for dry ration, for other commodities that go through Pakistan side, and they are being supplied from the Pakistan side and the vendors. So that should not be interrupted or halted in any case. Then I spoke to the Foreign Office officials as well, and they were of the view that yes, we are trying utmost capability. We are exercising our utmost capability to first accommodate all the journalists and their families, immediate family members, those who are stuck in Kabul and they wish to leave Kabul. I need to make it clearer, and I need to make it more clarified that there are rumors that Pakistan is offering everyone to come to Pakistan right now. The refugee influx is one situation that I just saw even yesterday when Taliban took over this border crossing. Even people wanted to cross that border point through that pedestrian crossing point that Pakistan has established to facilitate the pedestrian crossers. But that's not the case. Pakistan is right now, through e-visas, it's facilitating the foreign journalists, and now it has given another opportunity to those Afghan journalists who wish to come to Pakistan. Pakistan isn't inviting them. That should be standing much clearer to the international community. Pakistan did not say that leave your country and come here, but those who think that they are not safe there, it's up to their wish and whim. They can come to Pakistan, but they can apply a visa. Pakistan is not entertaining anyone without visa into Pakistan.
So Sumaira Khan, very important point you have just mentioned over here regarding the stance by the Pakistani authorities. I'll come back to you with certain other points to be discussed in detail with you. Senator Kakar, Sumaira just mentioned that Pakistani authorities are not in fact inviting everybody to come to Pakistan, but there are certain mechanisms which have been chalked out by the authorities in order to regulate that cross-border movement if somebody is interested to come into Pakistan. How do you think it would be effective in the coming days as well?
To be honest with you, I mean, Pakistani authorities would be interested and are interested that if any humanitarian crisis is generated, how best we can respond to that challenge. And in that, exactly when you talk of refugees, there are some vulnerable groups which must be given the priority. For instance, journalists may feel quite vulnerable vis-a-vis Afghan Taliban's behavior towards them, as there is an element of uncertainty. Though we should expect that they would be protecting their dignity and respect to the life. But the element of uncertainty needs to settle down at least for a couple of weeks, so we could observe and see actually what is happening on the ground in Afghanistan. And there would be some other vulnerable groups too. And Pakistan has been traditionally the longest from past 5 decades, one of the largest refugees. I mean, we do take pride in that, but at the same time, Pakistan has its own limitations, economic limitations, and this resource constraint would probably not encourage our authorities to be with an open arm to all the refugees and expect a huge inflow of people who are crossing on this side of the border. It will be very difficult for Pakistan to manage or maintain such an influx of the people in general terms.
So, Senator Kakar, building upon that particular point, now, do you think that the Pakistani authorities were visionary enough to see the situation happening a couple of years before when they started the border fencing along the Pak-Afghan border?
I have been in many meetings where such scenarios have been discussed for, if not last many years, but at least last few months. And all such scenarios were discussed, they were presented to the different forums of the parliament, from the side of the executive, from the side of the state institutions, which includes civil and military both. And such scenarios, the people on this side of, both sides of the aisle, government and opposition, they kind of came up with their own inputs that how such challenges should be responded. So yes, Pakistani government was in the thought process. They were in the way, in a right direction in order to anticipate all this situation. If not exactly, which is probably humanly not possible, but in general terms, more or less, they were thinking of the same lines, and this is what exactly the outcome has come, in my opinion.
Exactly, Senator Kakar, point well taken. I'll go to Sumaira. Okay, Sumaira, when we talk about there are certain reports which are coming from the Kabul International Airport, at least 5 people until now have been reportedly killed either due to the stampede or the gunfire that was being heard in and around Afghan, the Kabul International Airport. I mean, does it make people more vulnerable over there just because they don't trust the Taliban like they didn't trust them before, although the Taliban announced a general amnesty for everybody?
Jawad, general, like it was enmasked amnesty policy yesterday we heard from Taliban. And in specific, they did say that if we can forgive all the enemies and all the commanders who could be held responsible for the mass killings of Taliban, our commanders, and for imprisoning them, then if we can forgive them, then there is no logic in holding the...
What about the civilians? What about the civilians, the common public?
Exactly. They are very much clear about the civilians. I just a while ago, I spoke to Zabiullah Mujahid, the spokesperson, and he'll be appearing for the first time. I think he's going to appear on radio television Afghanistan in a short while, and this would be his first appearance. I think the move to make him appear on the national television which is also called Milli Television. So this is, I think, the move that they need to clear all the policies towards masses and people, because they are also they are observing the scenarios on airports and everything. And I think there are some policy statements that are going to be announced for people for Afghanistan, that do not rush to borders, do not rush to airports. But there is an element. People who have worked with ISAF, NATO, Resolute Support Mission, America, British, and everyone, they are right now in a self-fear. I got a chance to speak to many and spoke to two parliamentarians as well in the morning. And they were of the view that we did not face any difficulty as of now. Like till the time I'm speaking to you, they did not face any threat, any kind of potential threat. But why people are rushing towards border, that can be another question that we are seeking an answer to. Because there could be some pockets that are involved in looting, harassing, killing people in the name of Taliban. And Taliban have released a number on social media that if you face any problem, even Zabi quoted some internationally reputed newspapers and some social media platforms as well. I guess Independent is one of them. And he said that, and Tribune from Pakistan. They said that these two major media outlets published fake news without seeking clarification from us, and we never turned out any call or any query. But these two news items seem to be part of any propaganda that we did not get ourselves involved to. We never asked women to vacate bank jobs or to lose their jobs from anywhere, and even we are not doing that in Kabul. So just wait for our policy announcement. Do not fall for the propaganda. And my question was that if you find any culprit, or if you find any person who's culprit and he hails to your corridors, what would be the scenario? And he said that, smiling, that Sumaira, you are in contact with me for last couple of years, and you know that we are not associating ourselves with these kind of incidents. So we are definitely going into an investigation once the things get settled down in Kabul and the talks are done on the interim setup. So there is a delegation that is visiting your country right now, and yes, there is an Afghan delegation in Islamabad.
Sumaira, we'll come to that particular point later in the show, and we'll discuss with Senator Kakar and also taken from you that what happens to be the significance of that particular delegation that is visiting Pakistan after the Taliban takeover of Kabul. It's a time for a short break, and we'll also discuss the role of the international community when it comes to the likelihood of the refugee influx towards Pakistan, as well as when Foreign Minister of Pakistan, Shah Mahmood Qureshi, says about the reconstruction of Afghanistan. For that, stay tuned. Welcome back to Newswire, Afghanistan Special. I'm Jawad Tehami, and before the break, I was joined by Senator Anwar Kakar, who is joining us from Islamabad, and a senior correspondent, Sumaira Khan, who is reporting from the Torkham, Pakistan, Afghanistan border. So, resuming with you, Senator Kakar, a high-level Afghan delegation is visiting currently as we speak. And they have had their meeting with the Foreign Minister, Shah Mahmood Qureshi, and Shah Mahmood Qureshi has urged the international community to help in the reconstruction of Afghanistan. What do you think happens to be the responsibility of the international community and the United Nations in particular, with all its subsidiary agencies to help Afghanistan get itself reconstructed?
As far as the community, particularly the Western Hemisphere, is concerned, there is a famous saying of Hotel California that you can check out from there, but you can't leave. I mean, that is the kind of a situation in which the United States, European Union, its allies probably are stuck vis-a-vis Afghanistan. I mean, they have been there, they have for 2 decades, they are leaving, but they don't want that kind of failed policy should haunt them. And in order to avoid that, Pakistan, I think so, is in a very unique position where it can help itself, it can help Afghanistan, and it can help the global community as well. There has to be a political roadmap for Afghanistan, for its transitional period, and then for a settled, accountable government which accepts some basic norms agreed by all the players. So in order to achieve that kind of a roadmap, there is an important role for the international community to play with European Union, United States, United Kingdom, and all of them, along with the regional players like China, Russia, Pakistan, Iran, all of them. And they have, if that would be the best case scenario, if the allies on the Western Hemisphere and the regional players agrees upon some basics on the governance structure in Afghanistan. And that would be a win-win situation for everyone. They wouldn't get hunted for a failed policy of 2 decades. Afghan people would emerge victorious in that a genuine chance for peace and dignity and prosperity would be awaiting them, and the presence of foreign troops line that has to be come to a conclusion that the principle is that no more military interventions for either a regime change or bringing democracy or interfering in the domestic affairs of these countries. Let an organic social experiment occur in Asia, rather than imposing either some good choices or bad choices for that matter.
Okay, Senator Kakar, I'll go to Sumaira. As Senator Kakar already earlier in the discussion alluded to the fact that there might be a couple of vulnerable groups in Afghanistan who might be headed towards Pakistan. Since, Sumaira, you are in close contact with the Pakistani authorities, when it comes to the role of international community, in a case that sort of a scenario happens to be for Pakistan, those vulnerable groups heading towards Pakistan, so is there any concern that has been raised by the Pakistani authorities towards the Western powers in particular?
Yes, indeed, Jawad, there is no question about it. Pakistan has been repeatedly asking the international community to look into it. You are going for a rushed withdrawal, a withdrawal that is being unplanned, quite immature, and Pakistan was quite shocked on the reaction of international community. You see that even today we saw footages. It's gruesome. Like, people wanted to attach themselves from the outside of the plane, which is an Air Force aircraft. You can't even take that risk with the commercial aircraft. And many have been falling to death on the Kabul International Airport. And I just saw that footage, and the vulnerable situation, being vulnerable situation for some of the groups right now in Afghanistan would be Jawad, it can be 2 people. Like, those 2 fractions are directly affected due to this immature or untimely or unplanned withdrawal from Afghanistan. One is those people who have been working for the foreign forces, and be it any kind of department, starting from espionage to the drafting press releases for them and being interpreter for them. Although we always say that interpreters who, like, we saw some statements from foreign communities as well, and the heads of the state, starting with Joe Biden to Boris Johnson. that those who worked with us as interpreters, man, you should have a heart, and you should tell people, you should tell the international community what kind of services you have been asking these poor chaps to do for the international forces present in Afghanistan. It includes espionage as well, and espionage is anywhere is unforgivable act. So right now, even those people are seeing that if those communities, they don't offer us asylum or any kind of relief or green card or temporary work visa in America, Australia, UK, and anywhere, then Pakistan is our last resort. But Pakistan has been having faced a lot of things, Jawad. No doubt there is no other argument to counter this argument that Pakistan has been facing a lot, and two major provinces, Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, they have been facing deadly backlash of these espionage efforts from being launched from the Afghan soil, terrorism activities to launch from the Afghan soil into Pakistan, killing a lot of army men and civilians in the cities. Latest we saw in Quetta, that was an attack on a stall that was selling Pakistani flags, and it was confirmed in a press release by the BLF, and these three fractions are right now on the run, according to my information, in Afghanistan. So these people are directly affected by by this withdrawal, and I was amazed that international community, specifically if I talk about Australia is that one country. They shut down their embassy 3 or 4 months ago in Kabul, and despite repeated attempts and despite repeated meetings by the then a very famous national security advisor, Hamdullah Mohib, he tried his best to convince Australia to please reopen your embassy in Afghanistan, but they did not. And they stopped catering the applications for asylum and for temporary residence in Australia. So you can just gauge the way of the level of sincerity.
Okay, Sumaira, I would want to ask you, when you and Senator Kakar talk about the vulnerable groups, and you just mentioned your talk with Zabiullah Mujahid as well, that he is of the view that it is certain other groups which are using the name of the Taliban in order to intimidate and harass people over there, that makes them vulnerable. The second thing is that those people who had been working with the NATO or the coalition forces over there, they might be involved in some sort of espionage activities. The thing which makes me curious to understand from your perspective and your engagement with Zabiullah and the people, the Taliban, do the Taliban have the capacity to stop such type of activities if they can chase away the mightiest military power away from this country? So do they have the capacity in order to curtail these sort of activities, which might in future, which is already, as you mentioned, and which might in future earn a bad name for the group?
I think, Jawad, it depends a lot on the condition, what Afghans are going through. They have a history of doing this. Like whoever they see in a mightiest condition, they just join hands with them. So right now, I fear that element as well, that maybe their surrender option was only to get away with murder and get away with saving their own life. So that cannot be ruled out. If we closely, Senator Kakar is much aware of that scenario in Afghanistan, and a common habit amongst the Afghans, that whenever they would see a situation evolving and emerging, they'll try to mold themselves according to that situation. So I'm very sure that right now they're getting settled down with that. And if you talk about the elements in Taliban, we still have to wait for that. Jawad, we cannot assume anything, because assuming something with regards to Afghanistan, I'm really sorry to say,
okay, Sumaira, we shouldn't be assuming. Of course, I agree with you on this point, and I'll take this very important point of espionage activities for which the Afghan soil had been used against Pakistan, and
exactly.
We see a very famous case that was brought to the International Court of Justice. Kulbhushan Yadav, he had developed a network using the Afghan soil, and he was operating from Balochistan, and he was given the task
Jawad, if you take a closer look at the dossier that we handed over to the international community, and that was cushioned and that was endorsed by the Indus Cuisine. These two elements are enough for the international community if they wish to have a closer look at what Pakistan has been facing. More than 2 billion Indian rupees and more than $1 billion US dollar that was invested along the 2,600 kilometer long border with Pakistan, and there was a dedicated exclusive militia raised to sabotage Pakistan's CPEC project under the command of 35 Daesh commandos. And that is part of the dossier. Dr. Allah Nazar's activities over there. Everything was being launched by the Afghan, and 4 provinces. Dr. Anwar, Kakar Sahab knows, he knows that. So what kind of backlash we have been facing. 4 provinces, Kandahar, Nangarhar, starting from Badakhshan, Nuristan till Nimruz. What kind of hostility Pakistan had been facing, and even in Lashkargah. And then across to the other border that was being connected to Pakistan through the Indian consulate. And I'm talking about the notorious Mazar-e-Sharif Indian consulate. So this is very clear right now in front of the world. And our dossier, I would request you to once again do a program on that our dossier includes a lot of things to open the eyes of
we'll surely look deeper into that one as well. With this very point, Senator Kakar, do you think the Taliban have the capacity, the things which Sumaira has just mentioned, and the kind of espionage and sabotage activities which were being carried out against Pakistan from the Afghan soil? Do you think the Taliban have the capacity, if they are able to form an across the board and an inclusive government over there in Afghanistan, to curtail such type of happenings in the future?
Well, that is exactly Taliban would try to project of themselves that someone who's fully in control of that territory. And when they say that they are in full control of their territory, they are conveying this message not just to Pakistan, but to China, to Russia, to Iran, and rest of the neighborhood. That their soil would not be used against anyone. And the unfortunate part is that amongst all the neighbors, Pakistan was the most who has suffered for this these last 2 decades. As Sumaira was mentioning, whether it was Baloch militant groups like BLA and BLF and so on and so forth, they enjoyed camps on North soil, the patronage of war, and NDS was more or less like their satellite office. And then in the province, in the eastern provinces of Kannada and Nuristان, the religious extremists of TTP and ISIS, they were being plugged and blended together just to unleash surreal and bizarre onslaught on Pakistani soil and its institution. Now, it's a high time that Pakistan will be closely monitoring that whatever the future dispensation, the political dispensation of Afghanistan occurs, that will be the minimum that we should expect from any inclusive government or exclusive government. That is what the Afghans to decide. But our red lines should be and would be that Afghan it's a sovereign country, but it should not be used against any neighbor, be it Pakistan, China, or anyone else. Indians should be denied that they use Afghanistan for a terror tool as a strategic weapon to create influence.
Senator Kakar, a point well taken. Pakistan would definitely be monitoring deeply what kind of political dispensation happens to be over there in Afghanistan in the coming days. Senator Anwarul Haq Kakar, who is joining us from Islamabad, thank you very much for your time at Newswire Afghanistan Special, and senior correspondent Sumaira Khan reporting from the Torkham, Pakistan-Afghanistan border. Thank you very much for your time at Newswire. Newswire as well. And with this, we come to the end of today's episode. And in the next episode, we'll try to delve deeper into the other aspects of what could be the future of the war-torn country after the Taliban takeover. For that, stay tuned.